Lex. Let me tell you about an old friend of mine. Let me tell you about Lex. Lex was a real son of a bitch. Lex was a real man. A real manly man. Lex was the kind of guy who made Tom Waits look like your average Joe. Lex was the kind of guy who'd never take or make a low blow. Lex was the kind of guy to go camping in the middle of January with nothing but a flannel shirt, a pair of jeans, and a hunting knife, and get bored. Lex was the kind of guy to make a single bicep look like the Mongol horde. Lex was the kind of guy to grab a rifle from the gun rack and throw a can in the air behind his back and split it in half with a single bullet. I'm still not sure how he did it. Lex was the kind of guy to stare down a Jaguar, rushing towards him at full speed, and make it turn away. Though I saw him do Cadillacs, and a Ferrari one day. Lex was the kind of guy who won fights before they'd begun. That is, except for the fights that he got into for fun. Because, see, Lex was the kind of guy who had honor like an overflowing cup. And he'd always demand a handshake. And then he'd grip the other guy's hand so hard, they'd give up. Because they'd always admit they didn't have what it takes. Lex was the kind of guy you really admired. And Lex was the kind of guy that women desired. Because Lex was the kind of guy who was handsome in an ugly sort of way, and kind of ugly, but in a handsome sort of way. And he had just the right amount of body hair, and I hear he was pretty well off down there. Lex was the kind of guy to get into a drag race while driving a 10-year-old Buick and win. Lex was the kind of guy who'd get shot at and grin. Because Lex was the kind of guy who'd never back down. But Lex was the kind of guy where you'd get kind of scared when he'd frown. Because Lex was the kind of guy who always took risks. Because for Lex, failure was always risible. Because failure was weakness, and weakness and Lex didn't mix. Because Lex was the kind of guy who seemed invincible. And, apparently, Lex was the kind of guy to one day find a kind of lump lurking around in his body. And Lex was the kind of guy to one day, no fanfare, no conflict, just up and die.